The massacre of Hope Station, the stars had never looked so cold. Dr. Sarah Chen pressed her palm against the observation deck's reinforced glass, watching the nebula's purple glow dance across the medical station's hull. New Hope Station floated peacefully in neutral space, its massive structure gleaming white against the cosmic backdrop. For 3 years, this had been humanity's greatest achievement in interspecies cooperation, a medical research facility where humans, Altarians, Vexi, and dozens of other species worked together to cure diseases that plagued the galaxy. Sarah had helped design half the biological research systems aboard the station. Her background in military engineering had proved invaluable when they needed to create containment protocols for dangerous pathogens, but those days of war felt like a lifetime ago. Now she was just a xenobiology researcher, studying neural patterns in alien species to develop universal medical treatments. The irony wasn't lost on her that she'd gone from creating weapons to healing minds. Dr. Chen, we're ready for the next phase of the experiment, called Dr. Malik from the laboratory entrance. The elderly Altarian scientist's eyes gleamed with excitement. They'd been working on a breakthrough treatment for neural degradation, diseases that affected 3 different species. Sarah smiled and turned from the view. Let's see if we can save some lives today. She had no idea how prophetic those words would become. The attack came without warning. Sarah was deep in Laboratory Complex 7, 3 levels below the main medical bay, when the first explosions shook the station. The lights flickered, and the artificial gravity wavered for a moment before the emergency systems kicked in. Through the reinforced walls, she could hear the distant wail of alarm sirens. What's happening? Dr. Malik's translator implant crackled with static as he struggled to maintain his balance. Sarah's military instincts, dormant for years, suddenly roared to life. She recognized those vibrations, energy weapons. Big ones. That's weapons fire. We're under attack. The laboratory's communication system burst to life with panicked voices from across the station. All personnel to emergency stations. We are under attack by unknown vessels. This is not a drill. Through the chaos of voices, Sarah caught fragments that made her blood freeze. They're targeting the medical bays first. The children's ward is gone. They're not responding to surrender signals. Sarah ran to the nearest communications panel and activated the external sensors. The screen filled with a sight that would haunt her forever. Massive black warships surrounded New Hope Station like predators circling wounded prey. She recognized the angular design immediately Kethva collective vessels. But that was impossible. The Kethva had signed the Neutral Medical Accords. They were bound by galactic law to respect medical facilities. The largest warship fired its main cannon directly into the station's central hub. The explosion lit up space like a newborn star, and Sarah watched in horror as entire sections of the station's sections filled with patients, doctors, children, vaporized in an instant. They're not taking prisoners, she whispered. Dr. Malik moved beside her, his 4 eyes wide with terror. The Kethva honor the medical treaties. This makes no sense. Why would they? His words were cut off as another explosion rocked their section. The laboratory's lights went out. An emergency. Power cast everything in a hellish red glow. Somewhere above them, Sarah could hear the hiss of atmosphere venting into space. She grabbed Dr. Malik's arm. The deep bunker. If we can reach the sealed research vault, we might survive this. They ran through corridors that were already filling with smoke and debris. Bodies lay scattered where people had been caught by the initial blasts. Sarah forced herself not to look too closely at faces she might recognize. There would be time to grieve later, if there was a later. The vault was designed to contain the most dangerous biological specimens the station studied. It had its own air supply, radiation shielding, and communication systems. As they sealed themselves inside, Sarah could hear the Kethva ships moving closer, their weapons systematically destroying every part of the station. For 6 hours, they listened to their world die. The communication channels filled with screams, pleas for mercy, and finally, silence. The Kethva weren't just destroying the station, they were making sure nothing and no one survived. Sarah monitored their communications, and what she heard made her sick. They were celebrating, calling the humans and other species contamination. That needed to be cleansed. When the explosions finally stopped, New Hope Station was nothing but debris and corpses, floating in the void. Dr. Malik had stopped speaking after the first hour. He sat in the corner, his skin shifting through colors that Sarah had learned indicated deep trauma in his species. 3,000 beings had called this station home. Researchers, doctors, patients, families, all dead. But Sarah's military mind was working, analyzing what she'd observed. Something about this attack felt wrong. The Kethva were brutal, yes, but they followed strict codes of honor. Attacking a medical station violated everything they claimed to believe in. And their communication patterns she'd detected, encrypted signals that weren't in any known Kethva language. She began working through the station's damaged data systems, following traces of communication that had been thought destroyed. What she found in the encrypted files made her blood run cold. Financial records, transfer codes, communication logs between Kethva commanders and human corporations. The attack hadn't been about honor or territory. It had been a transaction. Meridian Dynamics, Stellar Industries, and 3 other major Earth corporations had paid the Kethva Collective to destroy New Hope Station. The reason was buried in corporate documents. Sarah managed to decrypt. The station's research was on the verge of breakthrough treatments that would make traditional pharmaceutical companies obsolete. Treatments that could be shared freely between species, cutting into profit margins that ran into the trillions. The corporations had convinced the Kethva that the station's research posed a biological threat to their empire. They'd provided false evidence of weapons development and promised the Kethva access to lucrative mining. Rights in human space. 3,000 innocent beings had died for money and corporate greed. Sarah stared at the evidence on her screen, and something inside her broke. Not her spirit that crystallized into something harder than diamond. Her faith in civilization, her belief that some lines couldn't be crossed, her conviction that healers were sacred. All of that died with the station. Dr. Malik finally spoke, his voice hollow. My daughter was in the children's ward when they hit it first. She was only 7 cycles old. Sarah looked at her colleague. Her friend Anne saw her own transformation reflected in his alien features. The gentle scientist was gone. What remained was someone who had lost everything and had nothing left to lose. I'm sorry, she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. The Kethva will pay for this, Dr. Malik said quietly. But how? They have fleets, armies, entire worlds. Sarah turned back to her terminal and began copying every file she could recover. The station's biological research, the weapons, schematics she'd helped develop years ago, the neural mapping studies they'd been working on, and most importantly, the evidence of corporate betrayal. We're going to hurt them, she said. Not with ships or armies. We're going to do what humans do best, which is... Sarah's smile was cold and terrible. We're going to think our way out of this. And then we're going to make them wish they'd never heard of humanity. She began uploading everything to a secured satellite beacon, one designed to broadcast across multiple star systems. The evidence would reach Earth, reach the other species' homeworlds, and reach the underground networks she knew still operated in the shadows of galactic politics. The HFY thought they'd silenced New Hope Station. Instead, they'd awakened something far more dangerous than any weapon the station had ever researched. They'd awakened a human genius with nothing left to lose and all the knowledge of the galaxy's most advanced medical research station at her disposal. As the beacon finished its transmission, Sarah turned to Dr. Malik. "Can you contact any survivors from your species' networks?" "Yes. There are others who've lost loved ones to HFY aggression. They'll listen." "Good. We're going to need allies." Sarah began shutting down the vault systems. "Because I know how to win this war." "How?" Sarah's eyes reflected the cold light of the stars beyond the destroyed station. "The HFY have a hive mind connection that links their entire species, their greatest strength." She began preparing to leave the vault. "I'm going to turn it into their greatest weakness." Part 1 of Sarah's story ended in the wreckage of New Hope Station, but her real journey was just beginning. Across the galaxy, the evidence she'd transmitted was already causing ripples. Corporate executives were panicking. Government officials were demanding explanations. And in the shadows of a dozen worlds, beings who'd lost everything to the HFY collective were receiving a message of hope. The biological revolution. 6 months had passed since New Hope Station became a tomb. And Dr. Sarah Chen was no longer the same woman who had once pressed her palm against an observation deck window. Marveling at the beauty of space, she stood, now in a hidden laboratory carved into an asteroid in the Kepler belt, surrounded by equipment she'd cobbled together from salvaged medical devices, black market military hardware, and technologies that officially didn't exist. The space was cramped, barely large enough for 3 people, but it contained some of the most sophisticated biological research equipment in known space. Sarah had become something new, part scientist, part revolutionary, part ghost. Her hair had grown longer and was now streaked with premature grey. Her eyes held a hardness that came from months of living in the shadows, building weapons from healing tools, and planning the downfall of an empire that had murdered her colleagues. But she wasn't alone. Dr. Malik worked at a terminal nearby, his Altarian features scarred from their escape from the station, but his 4 eyes blazing with determined intelligence. Around the small lab, holograms flickered, showing the faces of their network survivors from New Hope Station, victims of other HFY attacks, sympathetic beings from a dozen species who had been touched by the collective's brutality. "The neural mapping data from the station is complete," Dr. Malik announced. "I've isolated the specific brainwave patterns that the HFY use for their hive mind communication." Sarah looked up from her own worker complex biological synthesizer that she'd modified to create something that had never existed before. "And the delivery system, ready. The quantum communication virus you designed will piggyback on their own network protocols. Once it's introduced into their system, it will spread exponentially." Sarah nodded grimly. What they had created was elegant in its horror biological agent that would target the specific neural pathways the HFY used for their hive mind connection. It wouldn't kill them, but it would do something far worse from their perspective. It would make them individuals. The HFY collective existed as a single consciousness spread across billions of bodies. Their entire society, their military, their culture, everything depended on their shared mind. Cut that connection, and their empire would collapse into chaos as billions of suddenly isolated beings tried to function as separate entities for the first time in their species' history. It was, Sarah admitted to herself, probably the cruelest weapon ever conceived by human intelligence. Any word from the Earth contacts? Sarah asked. Dr. Mollick's skin shifted to show patterns of satisfaction. Better than that, the evidence you transmitted has caused massive upheavals. Meridian dynamics. Stock has crashed. 2 of their executives have been arrested. The Senate is launching a full investigation into corporate involvement with the HFY and the other corporations involved. Running scared, 3 of them have already begun offering reparations to victims' families. Sarah felt a bitter satisfaction, but it wasn't enough. Justice through legal channels would take years, if it came at all. The dead deserved better than corporate trials and slapped wrists. Dr. Chen, came a voice from the communication array. Sarah recognized it immediately. Commander Vex, a Saurian military officer whose ship had been destroyed by the HFY 2 years ago. He'd lost his entire crew and had been hunting the collective ever since. Commander, please tell me you have good news. Better than that. I have an opportunity. My sources tell me the HFY are planning a major military gathering at their primary communication hub near Rigel. Every high-level mind node will be present, including their supreme consciousness. Sarah's heart began to race. The supreme consciousness was the central control system for the entire HFY hive mind. If they could introduce the neural virus there, it would spread to every HFY in the galaxy within hours. When? She asked. 72 hours. I can get you within striking distance, but you'll only have one chance. If they detect the intrusion, they'll shut down their communication network and purge all connected systems. Sarah looked at Dr. Malik, seeing her own determination reflected in his alien features. They'd worked for months to reach this moment. All the research, all the modifications to turn healing tools into weapons of precise destruction, all the nights spent dreaming of the friends and colleagues they'd lost, it all came down to the next 3 days. We'll be ready, she said. The approach to the HFY communication hub was terrifying in its beauty. The structure was massive, a crystalline lattice stretching hundreds of kilometers through space, glowing with the neural energy of billions of connected minds. Smaller vessels moved around it like insects around a vast flower, tending to the technology that bound an empire together. Sarah's ship was hidden among a convoy of automated supply vessels, its sensor signature masked by Commander Vex's military-grade stealth technology. In the ship's small cargo hold, a single sealed container held what looked like a simple medical sampler. Few drops of liquid that would change the fate of civilizations. Approaching optimal insertion point, Commander Vex announced from the pilot's seat, Dr. Chen, are you certain about this? Once that virus enters their system, there's no taking it back. Sarah stared at the communication hub through the view screen, thinking of Dr. Mollick's daughter, of the children's ward that had been the first target of the attack, of 3,000 innocent beings whose only crime had been trying to heal a wounded galaxy. I'm certain, she said. Dr. Malik operated the delivery system, a modified medical injector that could interface with the hub's external communication ports. They'd designed it to look like a routine diagnostic probe, something that would be ignored by the HFY's automated defenses. Injection successful, Dr. Malik announced. The virus is entering their primary network. For a moment, nothing happened. The hub continued its gentle glow. The supply ships continued their routine flights, and the vast machinery of the collective continued its eternal operation. Then, the changes began. It started as a flicker in the hub's glow, so subtle that it might have been missed if they hadn't been watching for it. But Sarah knew what she was seeing. The virus was spreading through the network, finding and disrupting the specific neural pathways that bound the Kethva minds together. Within minutes, the flicker became a cascade. Lights throughout the hub began fluctuating wildly as the virus spread to more and more connected minds. Ships around the structure began flying erratic patterns as their pilots suddenly found themselves alone in their own heads for the first time in their lives. "It's working," Dr. Malik whispered. The communication hub's glow began to pulse irregularly, like a heart in distress. Across the galaxy, the virus was spreading through quantum communication channels, reaching every Kethva world, every ship, every mind linked to the collective. Consciousness. Sarah watched through the ship's sensors as the Empire began to collapse in real time. Military fleets suddenly broke formation as individual captains found themselves making decisions without the guidance of the hive mind. Colonial administrations ground to a halt as governors who had never acted independently tried to figure out how to function as individuals. But the most profound change was invisible to sensors. Billions of Kethva beings suddenly experiencing solitude, individuality, the strange and terrifying sensation of being alone in their own minds. "Dr. Chen," Commander Vex said quietly, "you've just brought down the largest empire in galactic history." Sarah felt no triumph, only a hollow sense of completion. The dead had been avenged, but vengeance had a price that she was only beginning to understand. Over the following weeks, reports flooded in from across the galaxy. The Kethva collective had indeed collapsed, but not into the chaos Sarah had expected. Instead, something remarkable was happening. Individual Kethva were making their own choices, forming their own societies, and many were reaching out to other species, not as conquerors, but as confused beings seeking guidance in their new independence. Some Kethva groups sent messages of apology to the species they had oppressed. Others began democratic governments. A few descended into violence, but far fewer than anyone had predicted. "The Earth Senate wants to offer you a medal," he said, "for services to humanity and galactic peace." Sarah laughed bitterly. "Peace? I committed genocide, Malik. I destroyed an entire way of life. You freed billions of beings from forced servitude to a collective consciousness," Dr. Malik replied. "You ended a tyranny that had lasted for thousands of years, and you did it without killing anyone." "I turned healers into weapons," Sarah said. "I broke my oath to do no harm." Dr. Malik joined her at the viewport. "Perhaps, but you also proved that humans don't need armies or fleets to change the galaxy. You did it with knowledge, with intelligence, with the same tools we use to heal." Sarah considered his words. In the months since the virus had been released, she'd received thousands of messages from beings across the galaxy, former victims of the collective, thanking her, newly independent Kethva asking for guidance, researchers wanting to study what she had accomplished. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we rebuild," Dr. Malik said. "The galaxy needs new medical research stations, new centers of healing. The Kethva will need help learning to live as individuals. And there are still other empires out there that prey on the weak." Sarah nodded slowly. She could never go back to being the innocent researcher she'd been on New Hope Station. The blood was on her hands, even if no one had technically died. But perhaps there was still work for someone who understood both healing and warfare, who could build bridges between species while preparing defenses against those who would tear them down. Dr. Chen, came a voice from the communication system. We're receiving a transmission from the newly formed HFY Democratic Assembly. They're asking for your help in establishing medical treatment centers on their worlds. Sarah looked at Dr. Malik and saw hope in his alien features. The beings who had once been their greatest enemies were asking them for help in healing. Tell them yes, Sarah said, and let's start designing a new kind of hospital ship. One that's dedicated to healing, but one that no one will ever be able to destroy. As she spoke, Sarah realized that her transformation was complete. She was no longer just a healer or just a warrior. She had become something the galaxy desperately needed: a guardian who understood that sometimes, to truly heal, one must first be willing to fight for the right to heal. The stars looked warm again, filled with possibility and hope. But Sarah Chen would never again look at them without remembering the price of peace, and the responsibility that came with the power to change worlds with nothing more than knowledge and determination. The healer's wrath had ended. The healer's wisdom had begun.